Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to bring a slightly different perspective to the debate and to draw on some of the insights we've been finding from a research program we're doing on competition in developing countries. Okay. Oh, hang on, let me go back to the beginning of the presentation. Okay. Yes, so this study we've been doing has been looking at four particular sectors which are dominated by big business, largely, sugar, mobile phones, cement and beer, the beer sectors. And we've been comparing them across 5 different countries. And we've been going to each country and talking with the market players, with the government, with regulators and other stakeholders. And although the study is based on economic analysis and there's a lot of detailed competition analysis in there, it's also been really instructive for us in terms of the sort of political economy of how markets work. I'm an economist. I've always fully believed in the importance of competition and market forces. But to be honest, this project has made me change my position in some ways. And I think what I've concluded is that although picking winners has obviously been very much out of fashion over the last, quite a long time, and is obviously very difficult to do, in practice, governments have to do it. I want to talk about that a little bit. I think the reason for my change of heart is really that it's pretty clear when you look at these sectors which are dominated by big business that it's not market forces and competition that really always determines what happens. You know, there's a whole range of other factors which are hugely distortionary and which affect which markets succeed or fail. Okay, oops. So I'm not going to go through this list, but these are the kinds of factors that I'm talking about, and they include things like state ownership, anti-competitive practices, regulation, industrial policy, of course. The one I want to talk about a bit more is this relationship between government and big business. Now, it's pretty clear that at least in the sectors we've been looking at, and I'm sure this probably isn't the same true of all sectors, but in the sectors we've been looking at, in many countries, there's a very close relationship between government and big business, either because government owns it, or because individual politicians own it, or their relatives, or just because the state intervenes a lot in the market. So there's a very, very close relationship. There's different types of intervention that arise because of that. For example, they can lean on firms to reduce prices or to have some kind of price ceiling in place. They can lean on firms to increase output or not to export. For example, if there's a shortage of something, they can lean on firms to provide discounts to other firms that the government wants to support or attract into the country. They can encourage firms to maintain high levels of employment, higher than perhaps they would have chosen to do otherwise. So there's a whole range of things that government are trying to achieve in their relationship with business. And these have different motivations. Often it's political objectives. Obviously, they want to win votes and maximise tax revenue. Sometimes it's very noble objectives in terms of maximising the contribution that business is making to development, but often it's also plain rent seeking going on, often at the level of the individual politician. Now, enforcement, they've got lots of enforcement mechanisms at their disposal, which can be both sticks and carrots. So the government can, if a firm doesn't do some of the things that the government is trying to get it to do, the government can, for example, impose regulation in quite an arbitrary way on that firm. We have lots of examples of these kinds of things coming out of the research. Or they can, for example, refuse to provide a license for a firm to set up a new plant. They can make it very difficult for the firm to import through customs. They can block things for months. And sometimes they use carrots as well, which is where we got very excited because often the carrot that is used is protection from competition from other market players or from trade imports. So what ends up happening, it seems, is that there's a stitch-up between the government and one or two, often big businesses in a country. And that is mutually beneficial, and it locks out potentially other players. So that relationship between government and big business can be what makes or breaks that company's success in a country. It's clearly not the way it works in every market or every country, but for what we've been looking at, we've seen quite a lot of evidence of this. So the implications of that, in my view, are that basically government has to show firms, when it's trying to attract new entry or develop a sector, it has to be able to show firms that it's going to support them. Otherwise, firms know that they can't, that if they enter the market, they're going to struggle to survive unless they have government support. They don't want to enter a market where government's already in some relationship with a firm and then find that they are not allowed to sort of expand or grow. So government has to be quite proactive in giving reassurance to a firm that it will get the support. And so government often has to go out and be quite proactive in courting foreign multinationals, for example. That seems to be fairly wide practice in any case. And secondly, and I never thought I would really say this, but I do think that maybe there is an argument that the benefits of offering some degree of protection, at least in the short run, outweigh the costs of that in terms of the overall economic impact, because that can attract new entrants into a market and overcome some of the costs and risks that they would otherwise face. Creates the incentives. The problem with that is it's very difficult to unwind that over time because you get very strong vested interests opposed to any kind of reform of that arrangement. So you really need quite a strong institutional mechanism in place to oversee that kind of a relationship, to make sure it's not abused by the firm, and to ideally over time, provide more and more competition so that you get a better economic outcome in the long run. And thirdly, this may be a bit less controversial, but it still kind of involves picking winners, is that I think governments need to take quite a targeted approach to tackling barriers to investment climate problems, because there's so many investment climate problems. Where does government begin? It can't tackle everything in one go. So maybe it makes sense for them to, in sectors where they think there's real scope for growth, to tackle specific investment climate barriers in a coordinated way, for example, providing the necessary infrastructure for a particular sector or firm at the same time as training up local staff who can then provide the labour that firm will need. So basically, in doing these things, though, government has to pick winners. So it's very, I'm not saying that's easy, and the big question is obviously which winners do you then pick? But that's what some of the other speakers have covered, and so I won't cover that as well. I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.